Good evenings. I am aware that I cannot greet everybody with the humor and wit that Robert McBride, who is usually my co-host, and I'm usually sitting on that side. Come on, no. So this is so unusual. But good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Carlos Kalmar. I'm the music director of the Oregon Symphony. And I brought Ron Blessinger with me, who is the first of all, he's a violinist at the Oregon Symphony for 5 years?
23 years. I joined when I was 3.
And as you are hopefully very well aware, and if you're not aware, check it out. He's the artistic director of Third Angle, that very innovative music group. Can you?
Group, presenter, yeah, we're a lot of things.
You're a lot of things. I couldn't attend their last concert, but I heard from many people that it was an amazing thing because they played one piece that is about an hour of music, and one of the shows, or maybe all of them, were at OMSI, and it was in complete darkness, including the musicians who played it. So all you had is you don't see a thing, and then you hear, which is incredible.
You hear hiccups and snoring. But the snorers we dealt with very well and effectively because the piece allows us flexibility to improvise a little bit and to have the kind of sound effects that bring someone right out of their snoring in a flash. So it was a spectacular piece and a spectacular evening, and the composer of the piece is an Austrian composer, Georg Friedrich Haas, and I asked you about him the other day.
I know the name.
Okay.
But you know,
Yeah, well,
I don't bring that type. If I bring modern music, I might likely be American.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought, Carlos had a brilliant idea for tonight, and you should be pleased to hear that tonight's concert will be performed here in complete darkness.
And we had to work very hard, especially for the Bartok piece, because the Bartok has a lot of tempi changes, and when the musicians don't see anything.
Well, we don't really look up that much.
I know. That is why I have to be so energetic, and that's why you know that I sometimes in upbeats breathe in so that at least you notice something is going on from the podium.
We're very grateful for the audibles, as we call them.
So you're in for a great program. This featuring Bartok, Beethoven, Haydn, and Johann Strauss. And it's actually, just to start by the end, one thing is kind of unusual for what we call a serious symphony concert. Waltzes are usually not being performed in subscription concerts because for God knows what reason they belong to the pops, which in my personal view is completely wrong, because first of all, they are as good as normal classical music, and that division during the times when Johann Strauss wrote pieces like this was not really existing to this extent. And second, but Ron can speak to that, at least I as a conductor can say it's considerably more difficult to conduct a waltz well than, for example, to conduct a Beethoven piano concerto well.
Well, and it's much more difficult to play in an orchestra waltz as well with an Austrian conductor. But it's really thrilling because we get Now, just like we mentioned Third Angle before, you know, the thrilling part of being that group is working with composers so that we don't have to guess about what the composer had in mind. We don't have to decipher what the score has. And in this case, with Strauss waltzes, we have an expert and person steeped in the culture who can enlighten us and help us understand, in particular, the waltz rhythm or the groove in 3/4 time. And it isn't just 3/4 time. And it was really fascinating during the course of the rehearsals this week when at one point Carlos says, no, that's Styrian. No, that's some other region of Austria. That's this, that's that. And we're like, wow, there's more than one region in Austria. That's great. What do you mean? I mean, there's 3 beats in the bar, and I think that we're doing a pretty good job with it. But maybe you could explain what we're attempting to do.
Yeah, what I was actually meaning, okay, Austria, which I think Austria as a country is smaller than Oregon. I mean, it's Europe, and it's a tiny country. Still, we managed to have many states, and the 2 most southern states, Styria and Carinthia. I use that analogy always when we play rhythms with a certain groove. So when you play rhythms with a certain groove, like when you play American music and you start conducting and the first trumpeter says straight or swing, and you say swung, swing, so swing, swung. And everybody already knows what that means. All you have to decide, if you even dare to go there, is how much swing do you actually want? And although I've never heard an American conductor or anybody who does American music talk about that, but there might be a different swing here in Oregon than there is one in Alabama.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this today because you also mentioned growing up and, you know, with learning playing waltzes as a violinist, as an orchestra player, I mean, steeped in the culture growing up. And I was thinking, you know, at the same time, I grew up in Eastern Oregon, and my dad was teaching PE class, and we had to study square dancing. You know, I was thinking, did you have, like, what is the curriculum for waltzes or the education? I mean, it isn't just a cultural it's like before you get your driver's license, you probably have to pass a waltz test, don't you? I mean,
pretty much. Actually, every youngster at age 13, 14 goes to dance classes in Austria. At least when I was growing up 10 years ago, we did. I don't know about today. And I was I always had the excuse that I actually came to Austria when I was 15, so I never went to dance class. I can't dance till this day. But anyway, the thing with the waltz is there are things that we do in waltz where we don't even have to think about it, because this is what we were breastfed. And that's why I put in front of you the analogy with American music. If I straight or swung or swing?
swang, is that the
language?
Sorry.
Semantics. And everybody knows, and I don't need to explain anything else. And in Austria, that's exactly what it is. Everybody knows a waltz is in 3/4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, but the second is a tiny little bit early. And if you do it too early, then I will tell you, please don't play the version from Styria, which is way too really out of whack. To tell you the truth, just to explain it, of course I make that up. I actually don't believe that.
I've been to Styria. I don't think
exactly.
I don't think you're so far off.
No, that's the thing. I mean, I know they are not so far off, but it's sometimes when you do things slightly out of whack, it has to have a certain sophistication in order to work well, and therefore I use some analogy. I could say, don't play like people from
Hermiston. That's where I'm from.
Exactly.
don't know how. Well, we swing, man. But we swing different.
So that's the story of what was going on in rehearsals here at the Oregon Symphony when we rehearsed the waltz, which you have to really rehearse all that things because it's tricky. It's really tricky, and if you want to do it well, and if you want to do it with taste, then you have to be very, very, in a way, detail-oriented. But it's a great deal of fun. And before that, in the second half of the program, we have a symphony by Joseph Haydn, number 64, which, by the way, you are going to be threatened tonight by whoever does the announcement from the stage and that you have to be really silence your cell phones. We are recording the Haydn Symphony. Essentially, we are recording the entire program for radio broadcast for our friends, 89.9 All Classical. But on top of that, this is one out of 3 symphonies by Joseph Haydn that we are recording this season. And I don't know about you, Ron, but
it's a bizarre piece.
Had you so ever
strange.
heard?
No.
Okay, just tell us more. It's a bizarre piece. What is bizarre for you?
What is bizarre for me? Well, that's a loaded question. I'm a musician, so I have my own definition of bizarre. But in particular, this piece, it just seems... I had a teacher once who used to say, the interesting thing about music, it isn't when it's going along straight, it's when it goes along and then it turns. And the thing about the Haydn is that it turns a lot. It doesn't take you, it takes you to a certain point and then stops or goes in a different direction, and it's so quirky and so mischievous. Yes. And in particular, the slow movement, which is infamous or famous for this.
I can now reveal, you can tell all our
Sorry,
colleagues.
did I give away the secret?
No, actually no. But you might ask, why on earth did I say it has to be number 64? I mean, 65 is good, and 62 as well, and 63, and I mean, it's Haydn after all. This symphony is there because of actually, when I was younger, I played this symphony many times as a violinist in second violin, and it just stayed. Things that you do when you're very young, in your teens, and they stay for you. And this symphony, which has no specific meaning per se, it's just a symphony, and it has a very odd title, Tempora Mutantur, Times Change. But nobody can really say why this symphony has that specific title. It can only be attributed to a quote in Latin that says, times change, so do we. How do we change? Well, times get worse, so do we. But the music by Haydn only gets better. And this turning that Ron was explaining that happens, actually this symphony, if I may, has at least 2 very conventional movements. The third, the minuet, is it's normal Haydn. There is nothing really weird. And the last movement, maybe not the way we played, but you know that these little things that we do, that's things that I think can be there. So you can argue with me, but not with Mr. Haydn. But the first movement is a little odd, but the second is really difficult.
Well, the fascinating thing to me is that it operates on a macro level too, because we don't associate eccentricity with Haydn necessarily. And when we see Haydn on a symphony program, whether in the audience or playing it on stage, we have an expectation. This is familiar, this is classic, this is known. No surprises. But I can tell you that there have been so many surprises and such a great journey of discovery for us with the piece this week. And I think it's really good for us to understand Haydn the eccentric rather than the icon, because he's really twisted in that slow movement in a very disturbing way. And that's great. That's a great discovery and a nice facet to our understanding of Haydn. I wanted to ask you about another thing about Haydn and Mozart in particular, Carlos, that we do when we play that repertoire here, and that is vibrato. Sorry, I know. Well, it's a touchy subject, but we don't vibrate very much when we play that music, and it's an interesting color. It's very striking. It also puts a bit more pressure on us because the intonation has to be really, really, really good. We don't get a high behind, really wide, what I call church lady vibrato. Sorry, I love church ladies. But we don't get to hide behind vibrato in that piece, and it's a different color and striking in its difference from really anything else on the program. So maybe you could...
Well, the reason why I like that type of sound is that is the sound that Haydn heard. I mean, this is purely historical reasons. That at the time, these pieces, even 50 years later, vibrato, meaning this thing that string players do, was not being used other than specifically maybe one note here. If I want to really point out that's an important note, then I vibrate. And the other things, and the sound of the orchestra doing that is very different and allows you very different concepts of how sound works in the symphony. And that's why I do it. I actually, speaking about growing up, I actually grew up musically, if you will, in Vienna. I was formed musically in Vienna, and Viennese always conceived themselves as the navel of classical music, although when I was growing up, things like do not vibrate when it comes to music like this did not exist. I used to play or massacre poor Mozart's violin concertos on my violin, and of course I vibrated. We didn't know anything else. That came later with more studying with great conductors like Nicolas Harnoncourt. One little sentence additional to the, because Ron has said this wacky, very crazy second movement. One thing that I want you to not expect is what is wacky about the second movement is actually the use of silence, because it works like language, and that's the only thing I can kind of, as an analogy, offer you. When you listen to Ron talking or to me talking, you expect that we are going to say something. So I already gave you a hint how this movement will be, because he simply, and then.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned language, because the first piece in the program, Bartók Dance Suite, we talk about, or we refer, or it emulates language in a particular way too. And I was able to go to Hungary once, and for the first time, being immersed in the culture and hearing the language, I could really understand Bartók, the folk musician, but also just in terms of the accents and just the way that the music sounds, and it emulates the language. And I think that's the same with Haydn, the same with all the composers, but particularly with Bartók on this concert.
Well, in this concert we will start, actually we start with the newest piece, and it's not that we go backwards, because Johann Strauss was of course after Joseph Haydn, but we start with the dance suite by Bela Bartók, which when it was premiered in the 20s, was okay success. It was, people didn't go crazy. The interesting point about this piece was that 3 composers of Hungary were commissioned pieces. And although I do not know exactly which piece Ernő von Dohnányi wrote, but Zoltán Kodály the great colleague of Bela Bartok, wrote his Psalmus Hungaricus, and Bela Bartok wrote the dance suite. And undoubtedly, when it was premiered, people recognized Psalmus Hungaricus as the masterpiece also, because Psalmus Hungaricus, without going too much into the piece, has a lot of political implications about freedom, nationalism, and so on. And this idea of nationalism, as Bartok faced throughout many decades of his life, did actually disturb him greatly. He didn't like the nationalism, and when later the nationalism became way right-wing and sympathized with the Nazis, Bartok was pretty much done with Hungary, and he left and lived for the remainder of his too short life here in the United States, where he died. But we are still around the year 1923, and Bartok writes this dance suite. And okay, here is the funny, if you will, funny thing about the dance suite. The dance suite, although not written that way, is a little bit like a potpourri of dance rhythms you can find in Hungary. And again, you can be astounded by the fact that a country that it is so small, I never did the math whether Hungary is bigger or Austria. But, I mean, depends on who you ask. But the thing that you find so different dance rhythms, because what you're going to hear is a piece that lasts 17 minutes, 18, has 5 movements, and each movement by itself presents in itself different dance rhythms. And I think it's absolutely crucial that Ron mentioned language, because I mean, in terms of language, if you have ever heard a Hungarian speak, you're going to be so amazed, because nobody, unless you're a Hungarian yourself, nobody can understand them anyway. It's a language with roots that are so intricate, and the only other language in Europe that exists that is same root is Finnish, which also, who understands that one? But in both cases, fascinating countries, fascinating people. But people, composers like Bartok, made it their cause to actually put the folk music into their works. And specifically, this work, the dance suite, has a lot of examples. And since Hungarian speech, often the accent in a word is on the first syllable. It's, don't say Bartok, it's Bartok, it's Godai, etc. Therefore, you will hear a lot of yada in the music.
Carlos.
Kalmar.
Kalmar.
But Blessinger
doesn't know, no.
Not so Hungarian.
No, not really.
So, speaking about what we do on in our is the dance suite difficult?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, Carlos, and we're barely hanging on. No. You know, here's the interesting thing to me about Bartok. Interesting how these guys, these composers, and I work with a lot of composers, as I mentioned before, but in a case of Bartok, sometimes it takes 100 years before the culture kind of really understands, or the musicians and all the organizations understand really how to play it and have it become a part of the repertoire. And it's fascinating to me how certain pieces of Bartok, even when I was in school, the Bartok Violin Concerto was being played, but it wasn't being played a lot. How these pieces have become just standard repertoire to the point where 7 or 8-year-old kids are studying the Bartok Violin Concerto, which blows my mind. It's such an incredibly difficult piece, but it's become mainstream repertoire. In the case of Bartok, also the string quartets and the larger orchestra pieces, of course, have been well established for a long time. But the extent to which Bartok's music has become just, you know, iconic and not so threatening is an interesting thing to me.
Well, and then after the Bartok dance suite, we have.
By the way, my mom hates Bartok, and she's a piano teacher. She's a very educated person and loves music. But to her, Bartok always represents contemporary music and the thorny stuff that drives people insane. And I'm like, Bartok, it's 100 years old, Mom. Come on. You know, lots happened since then. But I think that has framed my context on Bartok as much as anything.
Actually, that is pretty much exactly. I can second that, because 2 days ago I was talking about innovative programming for orchestras, something that, well, I try to spend a lot of time with. And somebody told me, and then, you know, you guys, as an example of modern music, you guys, I think a year ago, played with Joshua Bell. Joshua Bell played, as you expect, like a violin god. Audience went wild. And then at the end of the program, he said, you guys played something modern, and the audience went wild as well. Trying to prove the point that actually we program something modern, and because it's either great music or accessible, or we play it well, or all of the above, it's a great success with audiences, which usually would say, Bartok. And the piece he was referring was Janacek's Symfonietta, which is barely 90 years old or something like that. Who cares? The thing is that it's true that still, to some extent, Bartok is regarded as a modernist. And yeah, I can give you that sometimes his music can be a little bit edgy. But that is the perfect transition to talk about, and you have to understand things a little bit in perspective. We both might be lobbyists for the quality and the beauty and the impact of music by Bartok. And you might at the end of the day say, yeah, sure, I understand, but still not my cup of tea, which is great. But, well, there was this composer named Ludwig van Beethoven, and sometimes when he presented his pieces, people of his time said like, oh, God, what did you write? And now we are here, and I mean, to erase Beethoven from any concert hall because he is so modern is completely unthinkable. And we simply don't think, we don't perceive it as such, but in those days, it was a modern thing. And actually the third piano concerto that we are going to play with the wonderful Jeffrey Kahane is a great example of that, because Beethoven writes in his lifetime 5 piano concertos. The first 2 sound like Mozart a little more, or a little, I don't know what.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a fair analysis.
And then
well done.
And then he writes number 3, this one, where it's like, now wait a second, what is that? And you see Beethoven embarking something new with what a piano concerto actually will do. And then after number 3, of course, I studied math.
Yeah, number 4.
Yeah.
Goes completely off the rails. Starts off with the pianist.
So, yeah. So, I mean, we are here talking about a guy who was very innovative and without whom the form of whatever he wrote, mainly the form of symphony and the form of piano concerto, would not have evolved to where it later could be. And this is a great example of where the piece goes. One of the reasons why is the sheer length of the piece. And the amount of music and what happens in the music, the drama and the correlation of the music, of the movements to each other. I actually was talking to Jeffrey about that, and you know, there is this term in music between movements where it says on the bottom of the page, sometimes, attacca. That doesn't mean, it means actually what you think it means, meaning finish the movement, go, right into the next one. Okay, Beethoven didn't write this in this concerto, but the second and third movement, I looked at Jeffrey and said, I actually don't like attacca that much, but this has to be. And he said, of course, what else? Because the last note of my second movement becomes the second note of the third. And you hear that correlation.
Well, Carlos, one of the things, the skills we develop as orchestra players over the years is a very keen awareness of the clock. When it's break time, man, we're ready. And I'm keenly aware at the moment that we're out of time. So
I wonder why nobody has walked on stage and started to play the clarinet. You must be very intimidating.
Yes.
Because if I would be here alone, it wouldn't have happened.
Yes, yes. Oh, well.
Here they come.
Here they come.
So, please tell your friends about this concert. Thank you very much for being here. I know that we have some rain out there, but come on, we live in Portland. What else? And enjoy tonight's concert. This is Ron Blessinger.